Congress. Its leader was Dr. James Endicott. He was not a communist member, though some supporters were. Endicott was a First War veteran and United Church minister, a Christian, and a missionary who works for peace, he said.
I have come to the conclusion that the peace movement is the most universal and effective movement of the people that has appeared so far in history.
Endicott's peace rallies initially drew crowds by the thousands. His son Stephen recalls.
When he got excited, he would raise his voice and he would thunder what it was he believed in. And it was very moving to audiences.
In 1950, Endicott's Peace Congress launched a national petition drive. They proposed to ban the bomb and help outlaw war. More than 200,000 Canadians signed the petition. It was endorsed by the Communist Party. Endicott's own United Church called it propaganda and advised members not to sign.
As far as my father was concerned, he was public enemy number one. That's what the press said of him. The Winnipeg Tribune called him a Judas. And the Canadian cabinet was thinking of trying him for treason.
Dr. Endicott, who came...
Allegations of treason followed Endicott. In 1952, with Canadians at war in Korea, he traveled to Communist China. There, he accused allies of atrocities.
I have seen all kinds of incriminating evidence of American germ warfare. After seeing all this evidence, I know that the American government has carried out large-scale germ warfare on the Chinese mainland.
He was creating an atmosphere that the enemy, being Soviet communism, would exploit and encourage, people to, for altruistic reasons, maybe, to betray their country.
Just released films lay bare the shocking truth behind communist charges of germ warfare in Korea and the so-called confessions of captured U.S. airmen. Confiscated films show the Red press conferences where the American flyers admitted dropping germ bombs on civilian territory. Statements broadcast by the communist propaganda machine throughout the world and even carried into the halls of the United Nations. These confessions form the basis of a blatant symphony of hatred, documented for the first time in these films.
Oh, well, I'm angry at it. But then, that's part of the struggle. Some people came and tried to set fire to our house. I wasn't there, but they set a firebomb inside the side door when a meeting was being held there.
In Moscow in 1953, Endicott went further. He was applauded at a Kremlin ceremony, awarded a Soviet Peace Medal, and a $25,000 prize. The prize was named for Joseph Stalin.
Here he is, supposed to be sort of the united front figure, right? Not a communist leader. Why would he accept the Stalin Prize? So a couple of things like that. I began to be more than somewhat leery about James Endicott.
Today, my colleagues across Canada, the thousands who work in our peace movement, share the honor of the Peace Prize with me.
I despised him. I thought he was on the other, an enemy, a traitor to his country. I think he was sincere, and he was so wrong. And I think the Soviet Union propaganda used him, played him like a fiddle, like the whole peace movement.
And may this and all peace prizes have the result of being a bulwark to safeguard the future of the children of the whole world.
Why did he accept it? Well, I don't know. I didn't ask him. He was quite glad to. He felt honored to. You see, this prize was sort of like the Nobel Prize for the Eastern Bloc.
For sure, we were aware they were spying on us and presumably doing the same kind of thing in the United States and elsewhere. We simply had concrete proof of what was happening in Ottawa. So the Russians, though they had been allies in the war, clearly were not to be trusted and, I guess, to be feared.
An immigration officer in New York came aboard and set up an office. Actually, as I recall it, put a revolver on the desk, and one by one called us in. And what do you want? I would like a visa, I said in my turn. He said, "We're not giving out visas to any commies. Forget it."
Warning of the communist threat to Canada, authorities nationwide took extraordinary measures to counter suspected subversion. The defector, Igor Guzenko, now living under an assumed name as an ironworker in Ontario, wrote of his bewilderment, he said, that Canadians could doubt the threat was real.
There are some things of great value that are worth dying for, so that others may truly live. That's the way my father saw things.
Quebec enforced the padlock law and gave police powers to raid any property suspected of keeping communist literature. In Victoria, British Columbia, the works of Marx were banished from public libraries, and staff suspected of communist sympathies were fired. Victoria's mayor said he'd burn the books if he had to. Canada's largest trade unions, meeting in convention, voted to purge communist members. There would be no appeals. Labour proclaimed it was free of subversives. One union leader said, "We're serving notice on the communists. Their Russian holiday has come to an end." Leaders of the Canadian Labour Congress said trade unionists, even suspected of communist sympathies, would be ousted.
People got up and in withering tones denounced us, particularly me. One person rising and pointing a finger at me and saying, "See what happens when we send them to university."
The slightest doubt of loyalty would see civil servants fired. Security checks were run in every branch of government. Prime Minister Louis Saint Laurent would not disclose how many people were investigated. He said, "It's not a question of guilt. It's a question of confidence." Parliament enacted new security laws. Any Canadian who assisted a foreign enemy could be guilty of treason.
I think we can all feel that it has been a very fruitful and important Parliament. Perhaps one of the most important since Confederation, when we consider the various measures that were adopted and which I feel quite confident are going to be of lasting benefit to the Canadian people.
Spies could be sentenced to death. The penalty remained on the books until 1976. It was never used.
I would walk back on the way home to our house in Sandy Hill. I would walk in front of the Soviet embassy, and I don't know how old I was, but I was certainly old enough to know about the Cold War and the problems with the Russians and the Soviet Union. And so I would throw stones, my way of demonstrating in favor of democracy. And it turns out that the embassy then complained. And then the police came by, and of course I took off, but the third time I did it, they caught me and they identified me, and it was, I gather it must have been an embarrassing moment at home when my father confronted me, but that was fine. I had struck a blow for democracy, and that was it.
On New Year's Day, 1956, fire destroyed the old Soviet embassy in Ottawa. Employees and their families were not injured. The building itself might have been saved, but for an incident. Diplomats refused to let firefighters enter the building. Instead, they let it burn, while staff retrieved 2 carloads of documents from the embassy. Ottawa's fire chief said the delay destroyed the embassy. He did not know the Soviets had much to hide.
There's many books published now which reveal the true intentions of Stalinist-era communists in Soviet Russia and their program, their military program. We have history on our side today.
An expose the Metrokin Archive published after the collapse of the USSR documented KGB espionage in Canada from the 1950s. Soviet diplomats, it said, had recruited agents and spied on members of parliament. Soviet agents photographed defense installations and plotted to sabotage natural gas pipelines in a plan called Operation Cedar. The KGB scouted Ontario's Lake of the Woods for unmarked border crossings into the United States.
You were speaking about a person who was not only a dictator, but a despot and in effect, a mass murderer. You know, one knew that later, and when one came to know that later, and then recollect that you spoke glowingly of this person at an earlier time, you say, oh no, why did I do that? How could I do that? So, yes, of course there was a sense of shame.
There is pride in the newly won right to wear the scarlet tunic of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. There is pride in the precision of clicking heels and swinging arms. There is confidence and authority in heads held high. There is humility in the tradition of a great force.